No, it's perfect like that. Okay. So, okay. So, hello everyone. I think we could start already. First of all, thanks Adriana for organizing this amazing event that have bringing such inspiring contents and the will to keep researching and learn more and more and more, etc. So this section, mediation and social behaviors, will be based on 2 online presentations in a row and 2 more on site. Just an important remark. Our dear friend Sally Norman is in New Zealand, which is 1:30 in the morning. We imagine that she is really tired. So if you don't mind, Sally will do the presentation and after we'll rest as she's deserved. So from our Portuguese interpreters from the beautiful country of New Zealand, we're going to start with Sally Norman, Director of New Zealand School of Music from Victoria University of Wellington. Sally works on performance technologies, digital humanities, and the situated nature of culture and artist practices. As a scholar and practitioner, she has engaged with several international organizations within the domains of creative arts, electronic instrumental music, among others. So it is with a great pleasure that I give the floor to Sally Norman for the presentation of reflections about interfaces, social behaviors, sense of agency, and environment. So please be our guest and enjoy.
Thank you so much. Kia ora, greetings, and it's a real pleasure, and I'm very grateful, Adriana and the team, for inviting me to ICLI. I think it's a wonderful conference, and certainly the Portuguese have played a really important role in keeping this conference alive and kicking hard. You're going to be stuck with my talking head for 20 minutes. I had some film materials, but I'm not in a very good state to actually roll them coherently. So I will be reading largely my presentation. So please let me know if I'm going too fast or if I'm incomprehensible, which might happen. It's not that I'm too tired, it's because actually today is the New Year. It's the Maori New Year in New Zealand, Matariki, and it's a very special festival. And I'm doing a pretty big performance down on the harbourfront later on. So it's kind of quite a special moment. And so I'm going to try and make some sense. I've heard the last session, which was really interesting and very impressive materials. So I'm hoping there'll be some connections that maybe we can pick up on and by email or in other forms later on. So my approach to mediation and social behaviors is tied up with broader environment and cultural identity related questions. And these involve different concepts of time, duration, and legacies. The legacies that are left to us and the legacies that we leave for others. And it's very hard for me to separate out the social or the behavioral from the world in which we are situated. Way back in 1988, Donna Haraway famously stated that the only way that we can find a larger vision is to be somewhere in particular. The world, for Haraway, is an active entity whose codes are simply waiting to be read through the politics and epistemologies of location, positioning, and situating. Haraway's situated knowledge approach requires us to rethink human, non-human relations in specific contexts, as have done many subsequent writings inspired by her work. Things like new materialisms, vibrant matter, mediation theories that deal with actor networks and assemblages, Barad's interactions and entanglements, Harman's speculative realism. So all of these theories have been actually challenging and trying to deal with the human non-human relations that Haraway touched on so cogently. Science and technology studies, archaeology and cognitive theory have underscored also the co-shaping of human and technological evolution. And maybe I should point out that as a French Kiwi, as a dual national, I've been very influenced by authors including André Leroy-Gourand, Gilbert Simondon, Étienne Souriau, and Bernard Stiegler. These are people who have indeed very closely studied this question of the co-shaping of humans and technologies. These theories can help clarify the ways live interfaces or interfaces for live interactions reflect and reconfigure our relations to each other. In other words, our social behaviours and our relations to the other phenomena that form our environment. They're great theories, of course, and we all use them, and I use them enthusiastically. But at the same time, there's something about them, and particularly about the way they're applauded as new, that I find uncomfortable if we go beyond mainstream Western culture to places where the so-called human-non-human divide has never been categorical. It's something that anthropologists and cultural geographers have addressed, Stephen Feld's Senses of Place, Marilyn Strathern's Relations, and many others. But to stay closer to the ICLI themes, the missing of categories and ontologies, I think, is a feature, if not a driver, of artistic work that plays on different levels of existence. That's very much an Étienne Souriau type term. Materials and actions dissociated from their habitual contexts, defamiliarized or estranged, and those terms come very much from theatre, open us up to a realm where curious quasi-objects take on the special sort of eloquence only sheer appearances can achieve. That's a quote from Clifford Geertz. This special sort of eloquence elicits shareable effect that welds us as communities, as together we are able to entertain what were previously unimagined horizons. For the Polish author Bruno Schulz, there is no dead matter. Lifelessness is only a disguise behind which hide unknown forms of life. The range of these forms is infinite, and their shades and nuances are limitless. This quote comes from Schulz's Street of Crocodiles text, which has inspired many artists, including the Polish theatre director Tadeusz Kantor, who created a very famous piece called The Theatre of Death, and the Kay brothers, whose films many of you probably know. They've done a wonderful short film called Street of Crocodiles, where there's a really uncanny mix of very fleshy organic material and marionettes and objects and strange real biological creatures. And it's this quite promiscuous mix of different levels and types of existence and reality that I think is a specific prerogative that the arts can wield very usefully. So in the Kay brothers films, as in performing arts like puppetry, to which I'm very close, juggling and magic, relations that are woven across different physical materials and energies create situations that are otherwise inconceivable. They expand our ability to get beyond standard assumptions and so-called common sense. In their non-differentiation between human and non-human relations, the practices and values of many cultures resonate with recent Western concerns with the Anthropocene, which has obviously arisen in earlier presentations, and our broader environmental responsibilities. Here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the first country to ascribe legal personhood to a river or to a landscape feature, the Whanganui River became a person in 2017. Indigenous Māori share powerful stories of place that transcend linear causation or sequential narratives, and that view landmarks and living entities as both ancestors and partners. Māori origin stories reinforce the sense of identity and genealogy, and a sense of belonging and being responsible for place. Kiwi musician Warren Maxwell, he's actually one of the founders of a bunch of quite fetishized bands in New Zealand, but he's recently really evolved his practice quite strongly to integrate digital affordances into ancient, environmentally significant materials that draw on his Māori ancestry and stories of place from his Wairarapa region. While tuning to the sonic profiles of various natural sites, Warren discovered an entity that he calls koro, that's Māori for an elderly male or a grandfather. Koro was a log, or is a log, that was half submerged in the sand on the Wairarapa beach, close to Warren's home. Intrigued by its hull shape and the history that had brought him ashore, clearly from afar, given the type of wood, Warren took koro back to his studio. He added strings, contact mics, and synth functions. And he used various gestural interactions to elicit koro's voice. So he tapped it, stroked it, bowed it, drummed it, used all kinds of effects to bring out different sounds from this log. Koro was recently joined by punui, a driftwood log that was buried in a lagoon still in the Wairarapa region. And punui is now also equipped with strings and digital affordances. Punui, for Warren, is female, koro is male, and they have very different voices and they tell very different stories. He considers them as ancestral beings, and for Māori, ancestral beings are always present and always vividly of the world. In te reo, or Māori language, the past is described as the days in front and the future as behind. So life is spent moving towards and seeking carefully to uphold one's legacy to next generations, to fittingly honor one's ancestors. It's something much stronger than what we would call intergenerational equity. But it's also something that seems to be increasingly relevant today when we're recognizing the havoc that we've wrought on the environment for future generations. Musical performance's analog interfaces, in other words, physical musical instruments, have always required the repurposing or crafting of materials, inorganic and organic, notably live flora and fauna sourced from the environment. The spruce and maple of violins, the ironwood of Pacifica drums, we'll be playing some of those later today on the waterfront, the catgut and horsehair of strings and bows, the wood, bone and bamboo of flutes, and of course the minerals and chemicals with which this once living matter is treated to elicit specific physical and acoustic qualities. The technical processing that underpins the refinement of all these materials for cultural use in itself is evidence of socially transmitted practices, values, and rituals. The development of digital performance interfaces implies complex relations to these analog legacies on many fronts, including the fact that enculturated performance traditions continue to play into emerging practices. We don't simply abandon one set of behaviours when new affordances come into the picture. Then there's the fact that however digital their means of production, the vibrations that create expressive sound must be captured by our embodied physiological senses. We're victims of our bodies. And then there's the fact that the implementation of computational processes that were long framed as purely abstract mathematical constructs is increasingly recognized as being environmentally heavily taxing in terms of substrate and energy requirements. Beatrice Fuzzy and Matt Fuller, who's also already been mentioned, I think, by some of the earlier presenters. They describe computation as being both a technique of abstraction, since formal logic, mathematics, and manipulations of symbols and languages ground its procedures, and as a technology of material agency, which pragmatically partakes in the world it models and represents. Sound art, whether it's wrought by analog or digital systems, is similarly infused with dual legacies, those of the abstract, theoretical, mathematical premises of Western music, what Trevor Wishart has called lattice logic, and the visceral temporal resonances that trigger affective responses to music. So links between material and abstract symbolic processes and tools, or between analog and digital interfaces, in this context are inextricably entangled. Excuse me. Instruments and tools that enable us to sound out our surroundings in new ways reconfigure our relations to those surroundings. As an example of this work, I want to quote the Landscape Quartet that was led by Bennett Hogg from 2012, with the guitarist Stefan Österscher, the flautist Sabine Vogel, and the sound engineer Matthew Sansom. And together they engaged in collective exploration of natural environments using a mix of musical and technical instruments. The musician-composers forming the quartet consider landscape as integral to ecosystemic partnerships. It offers feedback loops that, if we tune to them, allow us to discover new sonic relationships, and thence new relationships between ourselves. Assemblages that the quartet explored include bamboo flutes anchored in and resounding with the forces of wind-swept terrain. There were some quite spectacular events along those lines in Sweden, and these can be consulted quite easily online. There were guitars suspended in trees, and violins with internal microphones were set in flowing river currents to sound their strings in totally new and unexpected ways. And there are there's video footage that I won't try and dredge up here, that you can see where Bennett is actually playing with his mic'd violins in the water. He's submerging them by the neck, and they're creating resonating bodies together with tree-borne guitars that were being played by Stefan Österscher. And there's a really interesting improvisational practice going on where the guitars that are strung up in trees and that are linked with strings through to the violins in the water are creating a very different sort of a musical circuit. They're obviously being played on by the flowing water and by the movement of the branches of the trees. In contexts like these, social behaviours that are marked by transformed approaches to agency and collaboration bind humans, our environments, and our technological interfaces in new ways. Divergent ways of thinking about the human-non-human divide are crucial for negotiating the relations and social behaviours that are being introduced by new sensing tools and techniques. Digital data capture and analysis enrich our understanding of the world we depend on, and often these same techniques simultaneously degrade the world they are illuminating. That's one of the ironies of contemporary technologies, or of all technologies. They provide insights into previously unfathomable processes and scales of existence, and there were some really great instances of these insights shown in the preceding session. An example of work that stretches our sensory bandwidth in the sonic sphere, bringing into our hearing acoustic phenomena that outstrip our perceptive capacities, is an installation called Rotes Rauschen by artist Kirsten Ergensinger and physicist Thomas Lepler. It's what they called a sculptural sense organ, or an artificial ear. It's an irregularly shaped, malleable polypropylene husk that's suspended from nitinol wire, and it changes shape as a function of data captured in the room in which it's suspended by a seismometer. The suspended ear has a kind of a resonance, a drone quality, which is actually quite purely the product of the materials. But this drone sound it's making is modulated by changing light frequencies in the room. So you can imagine that the hulk of this installation, which is modified by the seismographic parameters, it's an irregularly shaped entity, so it's quite spectacular, these transformations in its shape. These shape transformations then play on the light in the room, and it's the luminous data that is being modeled by the sonic qualities that are coming out of this through this resonant system. Again, there's a very good video of this, so my apologies if I can't show it to you, but it's a good descriptive document. So these are examples of very different ways of trying to meaningfully experience the resonance of distinctive locations and histories, ways of actually experiencing situated knowledges or situated sensuous knowledges. While rotes Rauschen seismographically reads its environment, it's still very probably adaptable to other spaces because it's a conventionally contained white box installation. There's something fascinating about this almost contradictory portability of a site-specific system, which seems to jar curiously with the ease of today's convolution-type acoustic porting techniques. Bennett Hogg's Landscape Quartet project is radically different in terms of its site specificity. It's an initiative that actually began when he dragged a mic'd violin along Northumberland forest paths he'd walked as a child with his grandfather, who was a gamekeeper. He did this to reveal unexpected qualities in what was a once familiar environment, but which was defamiliarized and made anew through technological mediation. And Warren Maxwell's disinterment of ancient logs, endowing them with technological affordances to let them voice their ancestral stories, is part of his deep Maori kaupapa, or principle, of knowing, learning, and being tuned to one's place in the world. So this is really, this is my presentation, literally a talking head with apologies. I don't have a conclusion, I just have lots more questions, and I'm hoping that some of what I've said resonates with some of the really, really fantastic work that I heard earlier. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sally. This was just amazing. For me, that I did a PhD in animation, I see here so many connections between the Streets of Crocodile, the larger vision to have something small in between, like in animation, what's happening in between frames is the most important. And coming back to how we became post-human from Donna Haraway, etc., it was just, could be amazing content to publish. If you ever consider to publish this, please talk with us, because this would be an amazing paper, article, whatever. So I don't know, you are very tired. If there's any questions, please give us just a few more minutes.
No, I'm fine, honestly, and please, I feel very ungracious because I would love so much to be with you, and I've been following the other presentations and they've been really exciting, and the questions are great. So please, yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Sally, not only for the presentation, because you are there from the very beginning of ICLI organization, so you are actually part of this whole thing. And to pick on what Filipe said, as you know, this is the ICLI this year is the beginning of a research project. So yes, we certainly hope to follow these discussions and then publish. That's part of the plan. Now, I have a question. I mean, I have many questions, but one that I would like to address immediately. I only found out recently, actually, and it's amazing that you mentioned that the river was became a legal person. No? It's a little bit like it's a little bit the extreme of Sophia, the the robot who also became a person in Israel. So that's sort of funny. But my question is. Okay, I sticking to the river part. Let's not talk about Sophia. So a person and is what is the definition of a person? Is it entity, and then does something or someone become a person or an entity as soon as somebody names it as an entity? I mean, what is it that makes something or someone a person? Or is there a distinction or not between person and entity? I would just like you
Okay.
to elaborate a little
No,
bit on that.
thank you. No, that's a beautiful question. Thank you, Adriana. I think what's really interesting about the Whanganui River and the Urewera National Park has also been given personhood status. What's really special about what's happening in Aotearoa is that we've had extremely deep consultation processes around the Tiriti of Waitangi, which was the fairly summarily and very expediently signed a treaty whereby the British basically stole land from the indigenous Maori people. So for the last decades, probably very strongly since the 80s, there's been major development in New Zealand thinking, in Aotearoa thinking, as to what belonging is and what relationship to the environment and the land is. And the Whanganui River is, it has many different iwi, many different tribes living along the river because it's a very long river. And within those iwi or tribal structures, there are many different smaller structures, hapu, which all have their own quite distinctive cultural practices. And those cultural practices are very interdependent with their natural environment. The lifestyle of somebody who lives in the Delta, by virtue of the sorts of food that they can grow and fish for, is going to be very different to the lifestyle of somebody who's living further up the river and closer to the mountains. And so there's a whole notion of identity, community identity, that can only be upheld if the qualities of the environment that sustain those communities are fully respected. So personhood means that you must respect the integrity and the health of that part of the natural environment that is ascribed to personhood. So it's actually quite simple, and at the same time it's incredibly deep and complex, because it means that you can't negatively impact, as has been the case and as is the case in many rivers and coastal regions in New Zealand. You build industrial plants, you build sawmills, and you totally devastate the landscape around them. And this sort of activity, this sort of human development activity, cannot be undertaken without really strict constraints. if you are dealing with a part of the landscape which has been endowed with personhood. So that, sorry, I'm a wee bit long in explaining, but that is how I would explain the situation with the Whanganui River.
Thank you. Any more questions? No, we keep it for later. So thank you very much, Sally. Please, good luck with your show that starts today. So everything, hope it's going to run perfect. So we see you soon, and we'll contact, we hope, probably someday here in person in the next edition of this event. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.